Alright, let's go with the tried, true, and tested. And tested and true? I don't know what order those words are supposed to go in. But we're gonna go with the M4. Red dot suppressor. Something chill. Something pretty simple to work with. Now you may notice that things look and sound a little bit different than usual here. And that's because I am back on my Vive. Temporarily. The other day when I was trying to record some Pavlov, my Valve index started playing up a bit. Screen was glitching out. Ooh, there we go. Good start, good start. The screen was glitching out, and then it just cut out completely. So it looks like I've got a broken cable. So while I wait for that to get replaced, I've had to go back to the Vive. Thankfully I can still use my index controllers with the Vive, which is what I was actually doing ages ago. Alright. Geez, we're actually off to a really good start. 5-1, nice. But I thought I would use this video as an opportunity to compare the two headsets. Now that I've used both for a pretty extensive amount of time. My index I've been using since that came out, so probably about 6 months now, I think. I think that's how long it's been out. And my Vive I've had since the Vive launched, like almost 4 years ago. It's weird to think that it's been that long already, since consumer VR started becoming a thing. Oh, there's two of them. Jeez, this is actually an insane streak. What am I on? 16! I'm on 16 already. Come on, come on. Oh, it had to end. It had to end. So yeah, we're gonna compare the Vive and the Valve Index and talk about if the upgrade to the Index actually makes a big difference for playing first-person shooters. Lucky streaks like that notwithstanding. So there's a few areas that I wanted to talk about. We'll start off with the big one, or what I feel is the biggest one, which is resolution. Oof. I can't quite remember what the actual resolution for either headset is, like the actual numbers, because I ain't that much of a nerd. I'll check them up on screen though. But the difference in resolution is insanely noticeable. Oof. Going back to the Vive, it means my crosshairs, or my iron sights or whatever, they're back to being like a pixel or two wide. And then enemies, depending on how far away they are, they're only a few pixels as well. It does make it harder to aim at longer distances. Close quarters seems to be fine. It's just anything beyond, I'd say about 20 meters, becomes noticeably harder with the Vive's resolution. Another one of the big things the Valve Index has over the Vive is its refresh rate. The Vive is at 90 frames per second, but the Index can go up to 144. Normally I run it on 120 though, just so I can get like a good frame rate when I'm trying to record as well as play. That is definitely noticeable as well. Things are much smoother on the Index versus the Vive. However, I'm not sure how much of an effect it has at improving gameplay. I mean, it has one. It definitely has one. But it's kind of hard to tell with the resolution. I think the resolution is having a bigger effect than the frame rate. So once I get my Rift S, I've got one of those on the way. That only does 80 frames per second, but it has a similar resolution to the Index. So once I've got that, I'm going to be playing around, comparing those two. I want to see just how much of an effect that the increased frame rate is having. What I think I actually missed the most, going from the Index to the Vive, is actually the field of view. This is the field of view on the Index is about 120. Was it 120 or 130? Again, I can't quite remember the specific numbers. I'll chuck them up on screen. And then the Vive is about 105-ish, I think. And yeah, I'm actually really missing the wider field of view. It's mostly horizontal, so like my peripherals to the left and right What do we do? 41 and 10. Nice.
Troisième quand même. Hey, j'ai un kill de plus, mais
So I'm fighting with close quarters combat. I am actually getting killed a lot more from flanks on the Vive. Because I don't have that peripheral off to my left and right. It's kind of harder to see, to like quickly peek around a corner and like scope out a room. Or even just be aware of when, yeah, people are trying to flank you. So while the resolution is having a big effect on long distance aim, the lower field of view is definitely affecting close quarters combat. A lot more than I thought it would, actually. There's one thing that I will give the Vive though, and that's the contrast, the black levels. So the Vive has an OLED screen, but the Index has an LCD. Now the reason they went with an LCD was that it's supposed to be better for like motion blur at higher frame rates. So they kind of needed an LCD to hit that 144 Hz. But it does have noticeably lower, not lower, it has worse black levels. So the blacks, instead of being like nice and deep, they look more like a muddy grey. And so what that means is that if I'm playing a map that's a little bit on the darker side, a bit more shadows around, it's harder to make out detail on the Index because everything looks kind of like mushy grey, all mushed together. So I've definitely got to give it to the Vive. The OLED screen, definitely better if you're playing on a dark map. Like, I understand why they went with the LCD, but it would be nice to see some newer headsets use OLEDs again. Because I believe the Rift S did a similar thing. The original Rift was an OLED, but the Rift S went to LCD. But they actually lowered their frame rate. They went from 90 frames to 80 frames. So I'm not quite sure what the reason for that was. The other thing I miss is the wireless adapter. I don't have that set up right now because it's not the easiest thing to use when recording videos. Mainly because battery life, if I run out of battery mid-recording, it can sometimes screw things up. I gotta get a bigger battery. But man, having wireless is so good. It took me a bit to get used to having to use a cable again. Just being able to like spin around super quickly, react to like what's going on behind me, people coming up and flanking. I've gotten pretty used to managing the cable. I don't often get tangled up in it, but I think that has affected how I play a bit. Because I am more of a run and gun player, but I do tend to find myself playing a little bit more safe now that I got the cable. Whereas when I was using the wireless, I could like spin around and do all sorts of cool 180s without having to worry about getting tripped over. For close quarters combat, being able to just like spin around and react more instinctively without thinking about if you're going to get tripped up or not, definitely a plus. I really can't wait until there's a wireless adapter for the Index. Valve has said they are working on one. They were like, last we heard they had like 5 different wireless solutions they were testing out. So as soon as they settle on one of those, I am so getting it. Because the Index is wide field of view, mixed with being able to react more quickly with wireless. That's gonna be killer. That's gonna be insane. Actually, in some ways, it almost feels like the ideal VR headset for FPS right now is a Vive Pro. Because that Vive Pro's got a similar resolution to the Valve Index. Which means that long distance aiming is not going to be an issue. It doesn't have the wider field of view though, but it does have the wireless support. And you can still use the Index controllers with it. It wasn't so bloody expensive though. I can only compare things in Australian dollars because that's all I know. But a Vive Pro is still like $2,000 here. Whereas a Valve Index, converting from US to Australian, well, it cost me about $1,600 to get my Index here. So, while the ideal setup probably would be Vive Pro plus wireless plus Index controllers, once you've got all that together, you're looking at close to like 3,000 Australian dollars just for your VR setup. So, yeah. Not really achievable for many people. How are we doing score-wise? 37-12. It's not bad, not bad. We got another 2 minutes left. We can probably bump that over 40. Actually, the last thing that I want to talk about... Bruh. I thought I had him for sure. The last thing that I wanted to talk about is the controllers. Because while I do love the Index controllers, they are by far my favorite VR controller. Out of the ones, the Knuckles, well, Index controllers, and the Rift controllers, they do have a few cons. Well, actually, one big con, and that's for pistols, which is that it's kind of hard to tell where forwards is on the controller. Not bad. Not bad at all. We got close to 50. That would have been nice to hit.
Alright, last game.
Maybe once I get my Index back, we'll be able to hit that. Back in the training grounds, it's probably going to be a bit easier to show what I'm talking about. So, the weird thing about these Index controllers is that when you hold the gun what feels like forwards, the controllers are actually like slightly turned in a bit. I think it's partly because of ergonomics, but it means that if I were to just like instinctively go where I think forwards is, what I think pointing forwards is, go straight up, I'm already shooting like way over to the left. Whereas on the Rift controllers and the Vive controllers, they're not really turned in like that. They're more shaped, so when you hold them forwards, they're pointing directly forwards. It's something that's kind of weird about the Index controllers, and I'd love it if they would like allow you to have some sort of virtual offset. Like they allowed you to have a virtual offset for the thumbsticks, because that's what they were finding. People would like hold down forwards, but because of the way the controllers were pointed, forwards on the thumbstick would actually be like a little bit off to the right, on the right hand. Instead of being like that way, it would be more that way. So they had to put in a virtual offset, so that actually worked. It'd be nice if there was like a virtual offset for what direction is forward. Because then I could just more instinctively like put my hands up and shoot directly where I want it to go. Now, I've kind of gotten used to it with the Index controllers. I do have to hold my hand like further over, angled over a bit weirdly, which does get a bit odd after a while. I actually can't wait until VR gets bigger and we start getting more companies just making controllers. Like, I can't wait until we have like our own Razor of VR. Because a VR controller that's tuned specifically for VR FPS games would be pretty nice. Something that's actually shaped like a pistol or a gun grip, has similar ergonomics, and like you can more easily feel where forwards is. Like right now, the Rift controls are probably the closest that come to that kind of design. So once I get my Rift S, I'm keen to test out like if it actually has that much of an effect on pistols. This isn't really an issue with two-handed guns though, because when you're aiming with a, let's just grab the auto shotty. When you're aiming with two hands, it doesn't actually matter where your individual controllers are pointing anymore. It's just the angle between your two hands. So it's not an issue when you're doing two-handed rifles, but as soon as you pull out a pistol, or even like say the P90, which is just based off of your one hand, that's when I notice that things get a little bit odd. With that aside, I really can't go back from using the Index controllers, just the extra buttons and everything, because like, unlike most controllers, it has a touchpad and a thumbstick and buttons, and then it's also got like the cool hand sensitivity and then the squeezing. Like I mentioned in my ultimate settings guide from a few weeks ago, where I talked about how to do Steam VR bindings, how I've got my Index controller set up so when I squeeze the controller, it ejects the mag. It just makes reloading so much faster. I can't go back to any other controller. But that's pretty much everything there is to compare between the Vive and the Index. I definitely find the Index significantly better for these kinds of VR first-person shooters. Definitely a worthwhile upgrade. Just the resolution, the frame rate, the field of view, it makes a huge difference to how you're able to play the game. Once they get a wireless adapter going, it's pretty much going to be the best thing out there. Hopefully we start to see some other headsets adopt some of the things in the Vive, especially the field of view and the frame rate. I really want to see frame rates go higher because it's not too different from non-VR gaming. A higher frame rate's always going to be better. Unfortunately, over on the Rift side of the fence, we've seen that trending downwards. They've gone from 90 on the Rift to 80 on the Rift S and 72 on the Quest. Hopefully they start bringing that back up again in the future. But like I said, I do have a Rift S on the way. Once I get that, I'm really keen to play around with it, start comparing it, see just how different it is for playing first-person shooters. Maybe I'll make another video out of it. I'm not sure yet. But until then, and until I get my replacement cable, looks like I'm back with trying to adjust to the Vive again. But I'm just really glad I can still use my controllers. So I hope you all have a good one, and I'll see you all in the next one.